I wasn't looking to mow anyone's lawn that day. Just needed to escape my empty apartment. After a divorce that left me with half the furniture and twice the loneliness, yard work had become my therapy. The rhythmic push of the mower, the scent of fresh-cut grass, it was the only thing that drowned out the thoughts in my head. But that afternoon in late September, when my neighbor Margaret called out from her porch, "Stay for dinner, I'm tired of eating alone," something shifted inside me. I had no idea those simple words would change everything, not just for her, but for the man I'd become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started as a favor, nothing more. I'd noticed her struggling with the old push mower 2 weeks earlier, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a loose ponytail, determination in every line of her body despite the obvious strain. Margaret Ellington, 53, English professor at the local university, had moved into the craftsman house next door 6 months ago. We'd exchanged polite nods, maybe a comment about the weather, but that was it. The neighborhood wasn't the kind where people got involved in each other's lives. We all had our stories, our reasons for keeping to ourselves. "Let me help with that," I'd said, crossing the invisible boundary between our properties. She'd looked up, surprised, a flash of pride crossing her face before resignation settled in. "Thank you, but I'm perfectly capable," she'd replied, straightening her back as if to prove the point. "I know you are," I'd answered. "But my mower's already out. Might as well do both yards." I was 38, divorced for almost a year, and yard work was the one thing that still made sense to me. She'd hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But I'll pay you. How about a glass of lemonade instead?" I'd suggested. That had been the beginning. Every Saturday after, I'd mow her lawn without discussion. She'd leave the lemonade on the porch table and retreat inside. We didn't talk. It was an arrangement that suited us both, two people bound by proximity but comfortable in our separate solitudes. Until today. Until, "Stay for dinner, I'm tired of eating alone." I stood with my hand on the mower handle, sweat dampening my t-shirt, caught off guard by the invitation and the honesty behind it. "I'm not exactly good company," I warned. Margaret smiled, a slight curve of lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good company is overrated. Honest company is what I'm after." I nodded, turning off the mower. "Give me 30 minutes to shower?" "Dinner's at 7, she replied, and disappeared inside. When I returned, freshly showered and wearing the only unwrinkled button-down I owned, Margaret opened the door before I could knock. The scent of rosemary and garlic spilled out into the evening air. "Come in, David," she said, stepping aside. It struck me then that it was the first time she'd used my name. Her home was nothing like I'd imagined. Instead of the professor's study I'd pictured, all dark woods and leather-bound books, her living room was awash in color. Vibrant paintings covered the walls, hand-woven textiles draped over simple furniture, and potted plants occupied every available surface. It wasn't cluttered, just alive in a way my apartment hadn't been since Julie left. "It smells amazing," I said, following her into the kitchen. "Just roast chicken and vegetables. Nothing fancy." She moved with precision, checking the oven, stirring something on the stove. "Open that wine, would you? The corkscrew's in the drawer." I did as asked, noticing how her kitchen was organized, everything in its place but nothing matching. As if each item had been collected individually over time rather than purchased as a set. Mismatched plates that somehow looked intentional, hand-thrown pottery bowls, wooden utensils worn smooth with use. "So, what made you decide to invite the lawn guy in?" I asked, pouring the deep red wine into the glasses she'd set out. She paused, a wooden spoon in hand. "Honesty, remember? It's my birthday. 53 years on this earth, and I couldn't bear the thought of another meal with just my reflection in the window." "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I would have brought a gift?" Said happy birthday? "That's exactly why I didn't mention it." She handed me a glass. "Here's to another year. May it be better than the last." We clinked glasses, and I noticed a faint tremor in her hand. "To better years," I echoed. During dinner, seated at her small oak table beneath a stained glass pendant lamp, Margaret revealed pieces of herself between bites of perfectly roasted chicken. Professor of 19th century British literature. Divorced 11 years. One daughter, Ava, working overseas for a nonprofit in Thailand. The move to our neighborhood was a downsizing after her university reduced faculty positions. "What about you, David? What's your story?" she asked, refilling our glasses. "Not much to tell. Software developer who works from home. Divorced almost a year now. No kids." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's your resume, not your story, she said quietly. But I won't pry. The honesty in her voice disarmed me. My wife left me for someone more ambitious. Said I was too content with enough when I could have been reaching for more. I surprised myself with the admission. She wasn't wrong. Margaret considered this, her fork paused midway to her mouth. Is there something wrong with contentment? In today's world? Apparently. And are you? Content? I looked around her warm kitchen, at this unexpected dinner with a neighbor I barely knew. Not lately, I admitted. But this is nice. After dinner, she brought out a small chocolate cake with a single candle. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you sing, she said with a small laugh. But tradition demands cake, even when celebrating alone. You're not alone tonight, I said, the words feeling significant somehow. She lit the candle, closed her eyes briefly, then blew it out with a decisive breath. There. Another year marked. What did you wish for? I asked. If I tell you, it won't come true, she replied with a playful arching of her eyebrow. Do you believe that? No, she admitted. But some superstitions are comforting even when we know better. We ate cake in comfortable silence, and I found myself studying her face. Margaret wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something compelling about her, the intelligence in her gray-green eyes, the laugh lines at their corners, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking. She caught me looking and didn't look away. Thank you for staying, she said simply. Thank you for asking. Later, as I helped her clear the dishes, our hands brushed, and she stepped back abruptly, a flash of something, vulnerability, perhaps, crossing her face. I'm not looking for anything, David, she said, her voice measured. I should make that clear. Neither am I replied, though something inside me questioned the truth of that statement. Sometimes dinner is just dinner. She nodded, relief and perhaps a touch of disappointment in her expression. Exactly. As I prepared to leave, standing at her front door, Margaret handed me a book. Borrowed companionship should be repaid, she said. You might enjoy this. It was a slim volume of poetry by Mary Oliver. Thank you, I said, unexpectedly touched by the gesture. Good night, David. Good night, Professor, I replied with a small smile, and saw a flash of pleasure in her eyes at the teasing. Walking the short distance to my own house, I felt lighter somehow, as if the simple act of sharing a meal had shifted something fundamental. The night air seemed fresher, the stars more visible above the suburban canopy of trees. I stopped in my driveway and looked back at Margaret's house, where light still glowed from the kitchen window. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of curiosity about tomorrow. That night, I read Margaret's book until the early hours, surprised by how the simple, nature-focused poems resonated with me. One in particular caught my attention. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The question echoed in my mind as I finally drifted to sleep. Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of rain against my window and the lingering taste of wine and chocolate cake. I made coffee and stood looking out at the gray day, my gaze inevitably drawn to Margaret's house. Her car was gone, the driveway empty. I felt an unexpected disappointment. I spent the day working on a coding project I'd been neglecting, but found my mind wandering repeatedly to our dinner. There had been something genuine in those hours that I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Not romance, we were both clear on that, but connection. Real conversation that wasn't filled with small talk or professional networking or the careful dance of dating. Monday brought sunshine and the return of routine. I saw Margaret's car in the driveway that evening but resisted the urge to find a reason to go next door. Whatever had happened between us, that moment of honest connection, felt fragile somehow, and I was afraid of breaking it through expectation. On Wednesday afternoon, a knock at my door surprised me. Margaret stood on my porch, holding a stack of papers and looking slightly flustered. I hate to ask, she began, but my printer died mid-syllabus, and I have a faculty meeting in an hour. Could I possibly use yours? Of course, I said, stepping aside to let her in. My living room, with its minimalist furniture and conspicuous absence of decoration, felt suddenly stark in comparison to her vibrant space. Margaret noticed my hesitation. I've interrupted your work, haven't I? Not at all, I assured her, leading her to my home office. The joys of being a freelancer, I'm always working and never working. She smiled at that. A philosophy my department chair would find deeply troubling. As my printer hummed, producing the syllabi she needed, Margaret glanced at my computer screen where lines of code filled the display. What are you working on? A tracking system for a wildlife conservation group, I explained. They monitor migration patterns, nesting sites, that sort of thing. That sounds meaningful, she said, with what seemed like genuine interest. It is, actually. One of my favorite clients. I hesitated, then added, my ex-wife always thought these projects were a waste of time. Not enough money in saving animals. Margaret gathered her printed pages. Perhaps she valued the wrong currency. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us, recognition, perhaps, of shared values despite our different paths. Would you like to have dinner again? I asked suddenly. My cooking skills are limited to about 5 dishes, but I make a decent pasta. She hesitated, and I immediately regretted the invitation. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous. Friday, she interrupted. Friday would be lovely. But this time, I'll bring the wine. After she left, I stood in my doorway watching her walk back to her house, papers clutched against her chest, silver-streaked hair catching the afternoon sun. There was an elegance to her that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with how she moved through the world, purposeful, self-contained, yet somehow open to its possibilities. Friday arrived with anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, bought fresh ingredients, and even placed a small bunch of wildflowers in a water glass on the table, the closest thing to a vase I owned. The simple pasta with fresh tomatoes and herbs that I'd made countless times before now seemed inadequate, but it was honest, like our conversations. Margaret arrived precisely at 7, wine in one hand and a small loaf of bread in the other. Fresh from the bakery near campus, she explained. Dinner was easier this time, the initial awkwardness of strangers replaced by the comfort of budding friendship. She told me about her students, brilliant but always surprised that literature requires work, and I shared stories of bizarre client requests. We discovered a shared love of hiking, though neither of us had gone in months. Why not? I asked, refilling her glass. Time. Excuses. The vague discomfort of being a woman alone on trails. She shrugged. The usual culprits. We could go together, I suggested, then quickly added, as hiking buddies. Safety in numbers. Something in her expression softened. I'd like that. As we cleared the dishes, working in comfortable tandem, Margaret asked the question I'd been avoiding. Tell me about your marriage, David. If you want to, that is. I leaned against the counter, dish towel in hand. 8 years. Good at first. Then just familiar. Julie's an investment banker, ambitious, focused, always moving forward. I admired that about her until she started seeing it as missing in me. What happened? She got a promotion, I congratulated her with champagne. And she burst into tears. I remembered that night with painful clarity. Said she couldn't keep dragging me toward success when I was so comfortable with mediocrity. 2 weeks later, she was seeing her colleague. 6 months after that, divorce papers. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Do you think she was right? About the mediocrity? I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times. Maybe. I don't chase promotions or bigger projects just for the sake of advancement. I like what I do. I do it well. Is that mediocrity or contentment? Perhaps the question is whose definition matters more, hers or yours. The simplicity of that perspective hit me with unexpected force. For a year, I'd been measuring myself against Julie's ambitions and finding myself wanting. It had never occurred to me that her measuring stick might not be the right one for my life. What about you? I asked. Your marriage? Margaret dried her hands slowly. 22 years to a brilliant man who could never quite see me. Richard is a neurosurgeon, saving lives, advancing science, utterly dedicated to his work. I was so proud to be chosen by someone like him. She smiled ruefully. It took me years to realize that in his narrative, I was a supporting character, not a co-lead. What happened? Nothing dramatic. No affairs, no fights. Just a slow awakening to the fact that I wanted to be the protagonist in my own life. She looked around my simple kitchen. So I left, finished my PhD, built a career. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Do you regret it? The years with him? No, she said without hesitation. They gave me Ava. And they taught me what I don't want, which is its own kind of clarity. Later, we sat on my small balcony, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The conversation had shifted to lighter topics, books we'd loved, places we hoped to visit, the merits of different ice cream flavors. There was an ease between us that belied our short acquaintance. This is nice, Margaret said, echoing my words from our first dinner. Unexpected, but nice. The best things usually are unexpected, I replied. She turned to look at me, her expression thoughtful. What are we doing, David? Having dinner. Conversation. Maybe becoming friends. Is that enough? She asked softly. The question hung between us, layered with meaning. For now, I answered honestly. I'm still finding my way back to myself after Julie. I suspect you're still carving out who you are after Richard. Maybe friendship is exactly what we both need. She nodded, a smile touching her lips. Wise words from the lawn guy. I contain multitudes, I quipped, and was rewarded with her laugh. As she was leaving, Margaret paused at the door. Same time next week? My place? I'll be there, I promised. And so began our Friday ritual. Dinner at her house, then mine, alternating weeks through the brilliant blaze of October and into the cooler embrace of November. We discussed everything and nothing: politics, philosophy, our pasts, our uncertainties about the future. We hiked on Sundays, discovering trails within an hour's drive, returning tired and content to our separate homes. The neighborhood noticed. Of course. Mrs. Holloway from 2 doors down made a point of mentioning how nice it was to see you young people spending time together, despite the fact that I was 38 and Margaret 53. Jerry, my other neighbor, winked conspiratorially when he saw me carrying a grocery bag toward Margaret's house. It's not what you think, I told him. Doesn't have to be anything, he replied with unexpected wisdom. Just nice to see you looking alive again, kid. And I was feeling more alive. My work improved as my mind cleared of the fog that had enveloped me since the divorce. I started taking on more challenging projects, not out of ambition but out of renewed interest in my capabilities. Margaret, too, seemed to be flourishing. She spoke of her classes with increased enthusiasm, began writing a book she'd been contemplating. For years, started wearing colors that made her eyes more vivid. We were careful with each other, maintaining the boundary of friendship even as our connection deepened. There were moments, her hand lingering on my arm, my gaze holding hers a beat too long, that suggested the potential for more, but neither of us seemed ready to risk what we'd found for what might be. Then came Thanksgiving. Margaret mentioned casually that Ava couldn't come home from Thailand, and her brother's family had planned a cruise. What about you? She asked. Going to your parents? I shook my head. They're visiting my sister in Arizona this year. I hesitated, then added, we could have our own Thanksgiving. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. The smile that lit her face was answer enough. We cooked together in her kitchen, moving around each other in a dance that had become familiar over the weeks. Turkey, stuffing, her grandmother's cranberry recipe, my mother's apple pie. The ease of it felt profound somehow, this holiday that had always been about family now reimagined with just the two of us. Over pumpkin pie and coffee, Margaret looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I need to tell you something, she said, setting down her fork. My heart sank, mind immediately conjuring worst-case scenarios. She was moving, she'd reconnected with her ex, she wanted to end our Friday dinners. I've been offered a visiting professor position at Edinburgh for the spring semester, she said. 3 months, starting in January. Scotland, I said, absorbing this. That's a fantastic opportunity. It is, she agreed, watching me carefully. I'd be teaching a specialized course on Gothic literature in its historical context. It's perfect for my research. You have to take it, I said, meaning it despite the hollow feeling expanding in my chest. I already have, she admitted. I just wasn't sure how to tell you. I reached across the table and took her hand, an intimacy we rarely allowed ourselves. I'm happy for you, Margaret. Truly. She turned her hand to hold mine, her grip firm. This thing between us, this friendship, connection, whatever it is, it's become important to me, David. More than I expected. For me too, I admitted. 3 months isn't forever, she said softly. No, it isn't, I agreed, though it stretched before me like an eternity. We cleared the dishes in comfortable silence, but there was a new awareness between us, of time now measured, of the value of what we'd found, of decisions that would need to be made. As I was leaving, Margaret handed me a wrapped package. An early Christmas gift, since I'll be packing during the holidays. At home, I carefully opened it to find a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with a simple tree design. Inside, she'd written on the first page, for new stories. For wild and precious life. I sat on my couch, holding the journal, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. 3 months would pass. Margaret would go to Scotland, perhaps return changed by the experience. I would stay, continuing our lawn mowing arrangement now out of habit rather than necessity. Whatever was growing between us would either strengthen in the separation or fade into a pleasant memory. The thought was unbearable. That night, unable to sleep, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable to the man I was before that September afternoon when Margaret called from her porch. Stay for dinner, I'm tired of eating alone. The next morning, I knocked on her door with a proposal that would change everything. The morning air was crisp, a hint of frost glittering on Margaret's lawn as I stood at her door, heart hammering against my ribs. I'd rehearsed what to say 12 times during my sleepless night, but now, with her doorbell echoing inside her house, every carefully prepared word evaporated. When she opened the door, wrapped in a thick cardigan, coffee mug in hand, surprise flashed across her face. David? Is everything all right? I took a deep breath. I want to come with you to Scotland. The words hung between us, bold and unexpected. Margaret's eyes widened, her grip tightening on her mug. You, what? I can work from anywhere. My clients don't care if I'm coding from here or Edinburgh as long as the work gets done. The words tumbled out faster now. I've never been to Scotland. Never been anywhere, really. And I faltered, then pushed forward. I don't want to wait 3 months to continue whatever this is between us. She stepped back slightly, creating space for thought. David, this is impulsive. You hardly know me. I know enough. I countered. I know you drink Earl Grey in the morning but chamomile at night. I know you unconsciously touch the scar on your wrist when you talk about your daughter. I know you hum Debussy when you're cooking and Dylan when you're gardening. I know you're the first person since my divorce who makes me feel like myself. Margaret set her coffee down on the entryway table, her expression unreadable. Come. Inside. We need to talk about this properly. In her living room, morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between us as we sat facing each other. This isn't a romantic weekend getaway, David. It's 3 months in a foreign country where I'll be working intensely. Teaching classes, attending faculty functions, researching. My schedule won't be my own. I understand that. Do you? Her voice was gentle but probing. Because I can't help feeling this is a reaction to the news of my leaving. An attempt to avoid loss rather than a genuine desire for adventure. Her insight cut close to truth, but not the whole truth. Maybe it started that way, I admitted. The thought of returning to life before you, the emptiness, the routine, scared me. But then I realized something else. I leaned forward, elbows on knees. I've spent my entire life playing it safe. Never taking risks, never stepping outside my comfort zone. That's what Julie saw in me, the absence of courage. And she was right. Margaret's expression softened. So I'm your act of courage? No, I shook my head. You're the person who helped me see that I want more from life than what I've settled for. Scotland is just the beginning. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those perceptive, gray-green eyes. Where would you stay? Hope flickered. I'd find a flat near the university. We could see each other when your schedule allows. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. And if it doesn't work out? If whatever is growing between us withers in Scottish rain? Then I'll have 3 months in a beautiful country, working on projects I care about, living a story worth telling. I smiled slightly. And you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you inspired someone to change their life. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You make it sound so simple. It's not, I acknowledged. It's terrifying, actually. But isn't that how you felt when you left Richard? Terrified but alive? The comparison landed. I could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, how her gaze turned inward to that moment of transformation in her own life. I leave January 10th, she said finally. That gives you 6 weeks to sublet your place, arrange your work, and reconsider this madness. Is that a yes? It's a we'll see, she replied, but her eyes held a warmth that gave me hope. Now, do you want coffee? Since you're here at this ungodly weekend hour. Over the next weeks, possibility crystallized into reality. I arranged to sublet my apartment to a visiting professor at Margaret's University, a coincidence that made her raise an eyebrow and murmur something about the universe's sense of humor. I informed my clients of my temporary relocation, upgraded my passport, researched neighborhoods in Edinburgh, and bought warmer clothes than my California wardrobe offered. Throughout it all, Margaret maintained a careful emotional distance, as if protecting herself from investing too deeply in a plan that might dissolve. Our Friday dinners continued, but now conversations turned practical. Her knowledge of Edinburgh's geography, Scottish banking procedures, transportation options from my prospective neighborhood to the university. You're really doing this, she said one evening in mid-December, the realization seemingly striking her anew as she watched me make notes about cell phone plans. I really am, I confirmed, looking up to find her studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Why? She asked simply. I set down my pen. Because for the first time in years, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what's expected or easiest. And what happens when we get there? What are you expecting from this? She gestured between us, naming the connection we'd still never fully defined. Honestly? I don't know, I admitted. Friendship, certainly. Beyond that, I'm open to discovering what's possible without forcing it into any predetermined shape. She nodded slowly. That's a good answer. Christmas approached, bringing with it Margaret's daughter Ava, home from Thailand for a brief holiday visit before returning to her work abroad. I met her at a dinner Margaret hosted, a striking young woman with her mother's intelligence and determination evident in every gesture. "So you're the lawn guy," she said when Margaret introduced us, her eyes twinkling with the same mischief. I occasionally glimpsed in her mother. "I prefer horticultural engineer," I replied, which earned a genuine laugh. Later, as Margaret busied herself in the kitchen, Ava cornered me on the porch, her expression turning serious. "My mother says you're following her to Scotland." "That's one interpretation," I acknowledged. "I prefer to think of it as parallel journeys." Ava studied me, unimpressed by my wordplay. "Mom doesn't let people get close easily. After my father, well, she built walls. The fact that she's letting you into her life, even as a friend, is significant." "I know. Do you?" she challenged. "Because if this is some midlife crisis adventure for you, it's not," I interrupted firmly. "Your mother is remarkable, Ava. She's changed how I see myself, how I think about my future. I'm not going to Scotland on a whim or because I'm lonely. I'm going because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to follow possibility instead of certainty." Ava's expression softened slightly. "She likes you, you know. More than she's admitting, even to herself." "I like her too," I said simply. "Just, be careful with her heart. It's stronger than she thinks, but it's been broken before." I nodded, understanding the daughter's protective instinct. "I promise." On New Year's Eve, Margaret and I shared a quiet dinner at my now half-packed apartment. The space felt transitional, neither fully inhabited nor abandoned, mirroring the liminal state of our relationship. "Any resolutions for the new year?" she asked, pouring the last of the champagne into our glasses. "Just one," I replied. "To live deliberately. To choose rather than accept." "You?" She swirled the bubbling liquid thoughtfully. "To remember that reinvention isn't just for the young." We clinked glasses as midnight approached, the television muted on the countdown happening in Times Square. "Are you nervous?" she asked quietly. "Terrified," I admitted with a small laugh. But in the best possible way. The clock struck midnight, and without overthinking, I leaned forward and kissed her, softly, briefly, a question more than a declaration. When I pulled back, her eyes remained closed for a heartbeat. Longer than necessary. "Happy New Year, Margaret." She opened her eyes, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Happy New Year, David." The moment hung between us, fragile and full of possibility, before she gathered her coat and purse. At the door, she turned back. 10 days, she said softly. 10 days, I echoed. After she left, I stood on my balcony watching her walk back to her house. The same path she'd taken dozens of times since that first dinner. But now everything was different. In 10 days, we would board a plane that would carry us across an ocean, away from the comfortable routines we'd established, into uncertainty. The thought was exhilarating. January 10th arrived with surprising speed. Margaret and I had agreed to meet at the airport rather than drive together, a small but significant choice that emphasized the independent nature of our parallel journeys. When I spotted her at the international terminal, rolling a single large suitcase and looking somehow both professional and adventurous in a tailored coat, my heart did a strange flip in my chest. "Ready?" she asked when I approached. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The flight was long, our conversation sporadic between meals, movies, and attempts at sleep in the uncomfortable economy seats. Occasionally our hands would brush as we reached for drinks or adjusted blankets, each contact sending a current of awareness through me. By unspoken agreement, we didn't discuss what awaited us in Edinburgh or what we were leaving behind. This airborne limbo was a transition space, separate from past and future. When we landed in Scotland, reality reasserted itself quickly. Margaret's university had arranged a car to take her to the faculty housing where she would stay for the first week until her rented flat was ready. I had booked a hotel near the neighborhood where I'd arranged a short-term lease beginning in 3 days. "I have orientation tomorrow and the next day," she said as we collected our luggage. "Dinner Friday? I should be settled enough by then." "Friday," I agreed, suddenly aware of how tired and rumpled we both looked after the journey. We parted at the airport, heading to separate cars, and I felt a momentary pang of doubt. Had I made a tremendous mistake, following this woman I barely knew across the world? Edinburgh answered that question for me over the next 3 days as I explored the city that would be my home for the coming months. The ancient and modern coexisted in fascinating juxtaposition, medieval castle and cobblestone streets alongside sleek restaurants and contemporary art galleries. In my jet-lagged wanderings, I discovered hidden gardens, atmospheric pubs, and winding alleys that opened unexpectedly into breathtaking views. My rented flat was small but charming, located in a stone building that had stood for centuries. The landlord, a cheerful woman named Fiona with a Scottish accent so thick I had to concentrate to understand her, proudly pointed out original architectural features while also apologizing for the temperamental heating system. Americans like it warmer than we do, she explained. But you'll adjust. Everyone does. I spent those first days setting up my workspace, finding the nearest grocery stores, and mapping walking routes to various parts of the city. Without consciously planning to, I found myself noting places Margaret might enjoy: a tiny bookshop specializing in poetry, a cafe that served the Earl Grey tea she favored, a hidden courtyard with spectacular gardens that would bloom in spring. Friday evening arrived with a nervous energy I hadn't felt since my first dates as a teenager. I changed shirts twice before settling on a blue button-down that Julie had once said brought out my eyes. The thought of my ex-wife crossed my mind without the usual accompanying pang, a realization that surprised me. Margaret had texted the address of her flat, located in a historic building near the university. When she opened the door, I was struck by how at home she already looked in these surroundings. The elegant architecture and literary atmosphere of Edinburgh suited her in a way that our suburban California neighborhood never had. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "It's still chaos, I'm afraid." Her flat was larger than mine, with high ceilings and tall windows that looked out over the city. Books and papers were stacked on every surface, partially unpacked boxes lined one wall, but she had already hung a few of her colorful textiles, creating islands of warmth in the transitional space. "It's perfect," I said, handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought. "Very you." She smiled, taking the wine. "That might be the nicest compliment I've received all week. Faculty orientation is not for the faint of heart." Over dinner, takeaway from a nearby Indian restaurant eaten at her small dining table, Margaret gradually relaxed, the professional demeanor she'd maintained at the airport melting away as she described her first impressions of the university, her colleagues, her students. "They've given me a lovely office with a view of the gardens," she said, gesturing with her fork. The department chair apologized that it wasn't larger, but compared to my cubicle back home, it's palatial. "How are the students?" "Eager. Serious. A bit intimidated by the American professor, which I find amusing considering I'm the one who feels like an imposter." She took a sip of wine. "And you? How's your flat? Have you started working yet?" I told her about my explorations, the quirks of my new living space, the project I'd begun for a conservation client tracking bird migrations across Europe. As we talked, the strangeness of our situation, two people who barely knew each other, now relocated to a foreign city together but not together, faded into the background. We were just David and Margaret, sharing a meal, finding our way. After dinner, she suggested a walk. "The castle is lit up at night. It's quite spectacular." We bundled up against the January chill and ventured out into the Edinburgh evening. The streets were alive with students, tourists, and locals, an energy pulsing through the ancient city that felt both welcoming and exciting. Margaret walked close beside me, occasionally pointing out architectural details or historical landmarks she'd already learned about. On the esplanade with the illuminated castle towering before us, we stood in companionable silence, breath fogging in the cold air. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For this madness." She gestured vaguely at the city spread below us. "For following me here. I didn't realize until we arrived how much I was dreading doing this alone." I turned to look at her, her profile limned in the golden glow of the castle lights. "I think we both needed a change. You just had the courage to make yours first." She met my gaze, something vulnerable in her expression. "I've spent so many years being sensible, David. Making the responsible choice, the logical choice. Even leaving Richard was a decision made after years of careful consideration. And now? Now I'm standing in a foreign country with a man I barely know, feeling more alive than I have in decades." She laughed softly. "It's terrifying." "The best things usually are," I echoed my words from months ago. We continued our walk, wandering down the Royal Mile, the conversation flowing easily between serious topics and observations about our surroundings. When we reached a crossroads, Margaret hesitated. "My flat is this way," she said, nodding to the left. "I'll walk you home," I offered. At her door, we faced each other, the moment laden with unspoken possibilities. I leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. Our kiss was gentle, exploratory, but with an undercurrent of something deeper that made my heart race. When we separated, her eyes remained closed for a moment, just as they had on New Year's Eve. Then she looked at me with a clarity that took my breath away. "I'm not ready for more than this, David. Not yet." "I know," I said, meaning it. "We have time." She nodded, visibly relieved by my understanding. "Dinner next week? My treat this time." "I'd like that." As I walked back to my flat through the ancient streets of Edinburgh, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. Whatever was growing between Margaret and me would unfold at its own pace. We were both carrying the weight of past relationships, past choices. But here, in this city of stone and story, we had the freedom to discover who we might become, together or apart. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm different from our California routine but no less meaningful. We saw each other twice a week, usually dinner at her flat or mine, occasionally meeting at a cafe between her lectures or at a pub after her faculty meetings. On weekends, we explored the city and its surroundings, venturing to the coast, hiking in the Pentland Hills, visiting historic sites. Margaret flourished in the academic environment, her confidence growing visibly as her course on Gothic literature drew praise from students and colleagues alike. I found unexpected satisfaction in my work, the change of scenery somehow unlocking creative solutions to coding problems that had previously stumped me. We were careful with each other, the physical aspect of our relationship limited to goodnight kisses and occasional hand-holding during our explorations. There was an unspoken agreement to move slowly, to build a foundation that wasn't based solely on attraction or the artificial intimacy of our unusual circumstances. In mid-February, Margaret invited me to a faculty reception. Fair warning, she said over the phone, it will be mostly pretentious academics trying to impress each other. Sounds fascinating, I replied, genuinely intrigued by this glimpse into her professional world. The reception was held in one of the university's historic halls, all dark wood paneling and portraits of stern-faced scholars from centuries past. Margaret, elegant in a deep burgundy dress I hadn't seen before, introduced me to her colleagues with a confidence that made me see her anew. "And what do you do, David?" asked a distinguished professor of something or other whose name I immediately forgot. "I'm a software developer," I replied. "Currently working on wildlife conservation tracking systems." "How interesting," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "And what brought you to Edinburgh?" Before I could formulate a diplomatic answer, Margaret slipped her arm through mine. "Me," she said simply. "He came because of me." The bold claim, stated so matter-of-factly, sent a warm current through me. Later, as we shared a taxi back to her flat, I couldn't help but mention it. That was quite a statement at the reception. She smiled, the streetlights casting rhythmic patterns across her face. Was it untrue? "No," I admitted. "Just unexpected. They've been speculating about you since I arrived. The mysterious American who appears at departmental events but isn't faculty or student." She turned to look at me directly. I decided to give them something real to talk about. At her door, our goodnight kiss lingered longer than usual, a new hunger evident in the way her hands gripped my lapels, how my fingers threaded through her hair. When we broke apart, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "Would you like to come in?" she asked softly. The invitation hung between us, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with certainty. "I'm not 20 anymore, David. I know what I want." Inside, the atmosphere had changed, charged with anticipation and a vulnerability that made every movement deliberate. Margaret lit a lamp rather than the overhead light, casting the room in a warm glow that softened edges and created intimacy. "Wine," she offered. "No," I said, stepping closer to her. "Just you." What followed was a revelation, not the frantic passion of new lovers but something more profound. A careful exploration, an acknowledgement of our histories written in the silver strands of her hair, the faint scar across my abdomen, the laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. There was beauty in our imperfections, in the evidence of lives fully lived before this moment. Afterward, lying in her bed with Edinburgh's lights twinkling beyond the window, Margaret traced patterns on my chest, her expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That I never expected this," she admitted. "When I accepted the visiting position, I imagined solitary walks and quiet evenings with books. Not." She gestured between us, "whatever this wonderful madness is." I pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Life's best surprises are the ones we never saw coming." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying my face in the dim light. "Like a neighbor asking to mow my lawn?" "Like a professor inviting the lawn guy to dinner because she was tired of eating alone," I countered. She smiled, then grew serious. "We return in 6 weeks." The reminder of our temporary arrangement hung in the air between us. We had both sublet our homes for the exact duration of her teaching appointment. Our return tickets were already booked. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight," I said, though the question of our future had begun to occupy my thoughts with increasing frequency. "No," she agreed, settling back against me. "Tonight is just for this." As February gave way to March, and the first hints of spring began to soften Edinburgh's stone facades, Margaret and I grew closer, physically, emotionally, intellectually. We still maintained our separate flats, our independent schedules, but the boundaries between our lives blurred as belongings migrated between our spaces, as we developed private jokes and shared references, as we began to think in terms of we. Rather than I. One Sunday morning, as we sat in a cafe near the university, Margaret looked up from her newspaper with an expression of sudden realization. "What is it?" I asked, concerned by the shift in her demeanor. "I'm happy," she said, sounding almost puzzled. "Genuinely, completely happy." I reached across the table to take her hand. "Is that so surprising?" "Yes," she admitted. "I've been content before, satisfied with my work, proud of my daughter. But this kind of happiness? I had almost forgotten it existed." The admission, so honest and unexpected, touched something deep within me. "I know exactly what you mean." And I did. Somewhere between that first dinner at her table and this moment in an Edinburgh cafe, I had rediscovered a capacity for joy I thought had died with my marriage. Not because Margaret had saved me or fixed me, but because our connection had reminded me of who I truly was beneath the layers of disappointment and routine. As March progressed, the question of our return to California loomed larger. We spoke around it rather than directly addressing it, focusing instead on places we still wanted to visit, restaurants we hadn't tried, experiences we wanted to share before our time in Scotland ended. Then, on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, as we huddled in my flat with takeaway containers and a bottle of wine, Margaret finally broke the silence on the subject we'd been avoiding. "We need to talk about what happens when we go back," she said, setting down her glass with deliberate care. I nodded, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "We do. I've been offered a permanent position here," she said, the words tumbling out as if she'd been holding them back. "The department chair approached me last week. They want me to stay, to develop a full program around transatlantic literary influences." The news hit me like a physical force, joy and uncertainty colliding in my chest. "Margaret, that's incredible. It's perfect for you." "It is," she agreed, watching me carefully. "But there's you to consider." "Me?" "Us," she clarified. "Whatever we've become to each other. I won't make a decision this significant without understanding what you want, what you see for your future." The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility. 3 months ago, I had impulsively followed this woman across an ocean on the promise of nothing more than friendship and possibility. Now, faced with a decision that would shape both our lives, I found myself calm, certain. In a way I hadn't been in years. "I think," I said slowly, "that the lawn at your California house is going to get very overgrown." Margaret's eyes widened at my implication, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. "David, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that home isn't a place anymore. It's a person. It's you." The words came easily, without the rehearsal or anxiety I would have expected. "My work is portable. My life was on pause before I met you. If staying in Edinburgh is what you want, then that's what I want too." She set her glass down carefully, her expression a complex mixture of hope and caution. "This isn't a small decision. Moving temporarily is one thing, but permanently leaving your country, your friends, what friends?" I interrupted with a self-deprecating smile. "Since the divorce, I've been a ghost in my own life. Here, with you, I'm alive again." Rain pattered against the windows of my small flat, creating a cocoon of sound around us. Margaret rose from her chair and moved to sit beside me on the couch, taking my hands in hers. "I need you to be certain," she said quietly. "Not just about Edinburgh, but about us. About a relationship with a woman 15 years your senior, about the complications that might bring." I turned to face her fully. "Do you remember that first night on your porch, when you asked if this friendship, dinners, conversation, was enough?" She nodded. "I said it was enough for now. Because even then, I knew there could be more between us. Not because I was looking for it, but because it was already growing." I squeezed her hands gently. "The age difference doesn't matter to me. What matters is who we are together." Something in her expression softened, a vulnerability showing through her usual composed exterior. "And who are we together?" "Better," I said simply. "We're better together than we are apart." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching mine. Then, with a decisiveness that reminded me of the professor addressing her colleagues, she said, "I'll accept the position." Joy surged through me, bright and unexpected. "Really? Really?" Her smile was radiant, years falling away in her excitement. "God, I can't believe I'm doing this. Accepting a job on another continent, planning a future with a man I've known less than a year." She laughed, a sound of pure delight. "What would my daughter say?" "She'd say her mother is finally living instead of just existing," I suggested, pulling her close. "She'd say I've lost my mind," Margaret countered. But she was still smiling. And she might be right. But it feels so wonderfully right to be a little mad. That night changed everything. The temporary nature of our Edinburgh adventure transformed into something more permanent, more profound. Practical considerations followed. My visa situation would need attention, Margaret's California house would need to be sold or rented long-term, our possessions either shipped or disposed of. But beneath these logistics flowed a current of exhilaration. We were choosing each other, choosing a future neither of us had imagined when she called out to me from her porch on that September afternoon. "I should tell Ava first," Margaret said the next morning as we lay in bed, Edinburgh's pale spring sunlight filtering through the curtains. "Before it becomes official. Do you think she'll be upset?" Margaret considered this, absently tracing patterns on my chest. "Surprised? Certainly. But upset? No. She's built her own life thousands of miles from home. She understands following your heart." Later that day, I walked the cobblestone streets of the old town with a new awareness of my surroundings. These ancient pathways might become my permanent home, these stone buildings and hidden gardens. The backdrop to a life rebuilt from scratch. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. I found myself at the castle esplanade again, looking out over the city spread below. A light mist hung in the air, softening Edinburgh's edges, lending it a dreamlike quality. Was I truly contemplating uprooting my entire existence for a woman I'd known less than a year? The David who had mechanically mowed his lawn every Saturday, who had accepted Julie's departure with resigned sadness, would have called this madness. But I wasn't that man anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Ava's happy for us. Says it's about time I did something scandalous." I smiled, typing back, "If this is scandal, we're doing it wrong." Her response came quickly, "Oh, there's still time for proper scandal. Dinner at 7? That evening at Margaret's flat, we celebrated with a bottle of champagne and takeaway from our favorite Indian restaurant. The ordinary meal felt extraordinary now, imbued with the knowledge that this was not temporary, not a pleasant interlude before returning to our real lives. This was our real life, taking shape around us. "I spoke with the department chair," Margaret said, passing me a container of sog painter. "They're thrilled, of course. I'll start the fall term with a full course load." "When do you need to give them a final answer?" "Next week. There's paperwork, negotiations about salary and benefits." She took a sip of champagne. "It all feels surreal." "Good surreal?" "The best kind." She set down her glass, her expression turning thoughtful. "What about you, though? Your work, your apartment back home?" "I've been thinking about that," I admitted. "My lease is up in June anyway. As for work, I've been considering expanding beyond freelance projects. Starting something of my own, maybe focusing exclusively on conservation technology." Margaret's eyes lit up. "David, that's perfect. Edinburgh has a growing tech sector, and with your experience, it's just an idea," I cautioned, though her enthusiasm was infectious. "I'd need to research the market here, build connections. The university has an innovation hub for exactly this kind of venture. I could introduce you to the director." I laughed, reaching for her hand across the table. "Look at us, planning a future. Terrifying, isn't it?" she said, but her smile belied the words. Later, as we lay together in the darkness of her bedroom, Margaret spoke in the quiet, reflective voice I'd come to associate with her most honest moments. "When Richard and I separated, I was convinced that chapter of my life was over. The part where someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses to build a life with you." Her hand found mine beneath the covers. "I never expected to find that again, especially not with someone younger." "Age is just a timeline," I murmured. "It doesn't define who we are together." She turned to face me, her features barely visible in the dim light. "Promise me something? Anything. Promise me we'll never stop seeing each other. Not the surface, not the convenient versions, but who we really are." I pulled her closer, understanding the fear behind her request. After years of invisibility, in her marriage, being truly seen was both her deepest desire and her greatest vulnerability. "I promise," I whispered into her hair. "And I promise to let you see me too. Even the parts I'd rather hide." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Margaret formally accepted the permanent position, setting in motion a cascade of paperwork, meetings, and preparations. I contacted an immigration lawyer who specialized in work visas for Americans in the UK, began researching the steps to establish a business in Scotland, and reached out to my clients to discuss the transition. One evening in early April, as we walked along the water of Leith, the river that winds through Edinburgh like a silver thread, Margaret broached a subject we'd been circling. "I've been thinking about our living arrangements when we return to California," she said, her tone deliberately casual. "What about them?" I matched her lightness, though my heart quickened. It seems impractical to maintain two households when we'll only be there for a few weeks to pack up. I stopped walking, turning to face her. Margaret Ellington, are you asking me to move in with you? A blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the fading light. I suppose I am. Temporarily, at least. And after we return to Edinburgh? I pressed gently. She met my eyes directly. I'd like us to find a place together. Something that's ours from the beginning, not mine that you've moved into or vice versa. The significance of her words wasn't lost on me. After 2 decades in a marriage where she'd felt invisible, and years of careful independence afterward, sharing a home represented a monumental step. I'd like that too, I said simply, pulling her into an embrace that said more than words could. As April yielded to May, Edinburgh transformed. Trees burst into blossom, gardens erupted with color, and the days stretched longer, the northern latitude gifting us with extended twilights that turned the ancient city golden. Our remaining time felt precious, each experience infused with the knowledge that we would soon leave, however temporarily. I need to fly back a week before you, Margaret said one Sunday as we picnicked in the Princes Street Gardens, the castle looming above us. There's a faculty meeting I can't miss, and I need to start arrangements for selling the house. I can handle things here, I assured her. Final packing, closing up both flats. She nodded, but there was a tension in her shoulders I'd come to recognize. It's odd, isn't it? We're returning to where we began, but everything is different. Second chances often come disguised as hard choices, I said, remembering something my grandmother used to say. Margaret smiled at that, reaching for my hand. Your grandmother was wise. She would have loved you, I said, the words emerging before I'd fully considered them. Something shifted in Margaret's expression, a softening I couldn't quite interpret. Tell me about her. For the next hour, I shared stories of my grandmother, her stubborn independence, her quiet wisdom, her belief in second acts and reinvention. It occurred to me, as I spoke, that I'd never talked about her with Julie. That part of my history had remained locked away, too precious to risk dismissal or disinterest. She sounds remarkable, Margaret said when I finally fell silent. Like someone who understood that life doesn't follow a straight line. No, I agreed, watching a young couple stroll past our picnic spot, their future as uncertain as ours had been months ago. The best paths rarely do. Margaret's departure date arrived with startling swiftness. I drove her to the airport in a rental car, the practicalities of luggage and timing temporarily distracting us from the emotional weight of our first separation since arriving in Edinburgh. At the departure terminal, she turned to me with uncharacteristic uncertainty. It's only a week, she said, as if reminding herself. 7 days, I confirmed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then we start the next chapter. She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes briefly. I've never been good at goodbyes, even temporary ones. Then don't say goodbye. Say, see you soon. A smile touched her lips. See you soon, David. I watched her walk through security, turning once to wave before disappearing into the flow of travelers. The week stretched before me, suddenly emptier than I'd anticipated. I'd grown accustomed to her presence, to sharing discoveries and quiet evenings, to the rhythm of 2 lives intertwining. Rather than dwelling on her absence, I threw myself into preparations for our departure. I cleaned both flats, packed our remaining belongings, and tied up loose ends with my clients. In the evenings, I explored parts of Edinburgh we hadn't visited together, making mental notes of places to show her when we returned. On my final night alone, I walked to Arthur's Seat, the ancient volcano that looms over the city. The climb was steeper than I'd expected, my breath coming in sharp bursts as I neared the summit. But the view that greeted me was worth every labored step. Edinburgh spread below in panoramic splendor, the North Sea gleaming on the horizon, the castle and old town silhouetted against the setting sun. I took a photo to send to Margaret, then sat on a rocky outcrop, letting the wind and silence wash over me. 6 months ago, I had been a different man, passive, resigned, living in the shadow of failure. Now, I stood on a mountain in Scotland, preparing to build a new life with a woman who had awakened parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a calm certainty I'd rarely experienced. Whatever challenges awaited us, we would face them together, 2 people who had found each other not in the flush of youth but in the rich complexity of middle life. My flight the next day was uneventful, the long journey across the Atlantic giving me time to reflect on the months since Margaret's simple invitation to dinner. I hadn't recognized it then as a turning point, but life's most significant moments often arrive disguised as ordinary choices. California greeted me with sunshine and familiar scents, eucalyptus, jasmine, the particular quality of coastal air. When the taxi pulled up to Margaret's house, I felt a strange dissonance. This place that had once been merely next door was now a temporary way station on a journey to somewhere else. Margaret opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up in a way that erased the fatigue of travel instantly. "Welcome home," she said, pulling me into an embrace that felt like returning to myself. The week of separation had changed something between us, deepening our connection in a way I hadn't anticipated. That night, as we lay talking in her bedroom, a space I'd never entered during our California days, she confessed that she'd been nervous about our reunion. "I worried that being back here might change things," she admitted. "That what felt right in Edinburgh might seem like madness in the light of home. And does it?" She propped herself up on one elbow, studying my face in the moonlight filtering through her curtains. "No. If anything, it feels more right. Seeing you here, in the place where we began, it confirms everything." The following days were a whirlwind of activity, meetings with realtors, sorting through possessions, deciding what to ship to Scotland and what to sell or donate. We held a yard sale that turned into an impromptu goodbye party as neighbors stopped by, curious about our plans. Mrs. Holloway from 2 doors down clasped Margaret's hands in hers. "Scotland? How romantic!" she exclaimed, casting a knowing glance my way. "I always said you two had a special connection." Jerry, my neighbor on the other side, helped me load boxes into storage. "Never would have pegged you for the adventurous type," he remarked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Good for you, man. Most people talk about changing their lives, you're actually doing it." His words stayed with me, a reminder that what might appear reckless from the outside was, in fact, the most authentic choice I'd ever made. The night before Margaret's house officially went on the market, we sat on her porch, the same porch where she'd first invited me to dinner. The evening was warm, cicadas providing a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. "It's strange to be leaving," she said, looking out at the neighborhood she'd called home for only a short time. "I never really put down roots here, but still." "Endings are always bittersweet," I offered. "Even when you're moving toward something better." She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Are you sure about this, David? About Edinburgh, about us? It's not too late to change your mind." The question didn't sting or worry me as it might have weeks ago. I understood now that it came not from doubt but from Margaret's deep-seated fear of someone staying for the wrong reasons. "I've never been more certain of anything," I said honestly. "I'm not following you to Edinburgh because I'm afraid to be alone or because I'm running from my past. I'm going because I want to build a future with you, wherever that might be." She nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "Good answer." As I looked at her, this remarkable woman who had called out to me on a September afternoon, I felt a clarity that had eluded me for years. Life didn't offer guarantees. The path ahead would have its challenges, its moments of doubt and difficulty. But for the first time, I was walking that path by choice, not by default. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out a small box, not velvet like a ring case but simple cardboard. Margaret looked at it with curious hesitation. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside lay a key on a silver chain, Scottish thistles engraved on its bow. "It's a traditional Scottish house key," I explained. "I had it made before I left Edinburgh. For our future home." She lifted it carefully, the metal catching the porch light. "It's beautiful. I know we don't have a place yet, but I wanted you to have something tangible, something that represents what we're building together." Margaret slipped the chain over her head, the key resting against her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We sat in silence after that, her hand in mine, watching the stars emerge above our soon-to-be former neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring more paperwork, more decisions, more steps toward our new life. But tonight was for acknowledging the journey, not just the physical distance we would travel back to Edinburgh, but the emotional terrain we had covered to find each other. As if reading my thoughts, Margaret squeezed my hand. "I never expected this, you know. When I asked you to stay for dinner that day, I was just lonely. And now?" She turned to me, her eyes reflecting starlight and certainty. "Now I'm not lonely anymore. I'm home." The word hung between us, simple yet profound. Home, not a place but a state of being. Not walls and a roof but understanding. And acceptance. Not where you are but who you're with. I leaned in to kiss her, there on the porch where our story had begun. Whatever lay ahead in Edinburgh, challenges, adventures, the day-to-day realities of building a life together, we would face it as partners who had found in each other something neither had expected, a second chance at a first love. Later that night, as Margaret slept beside me, I thought about the man I had been before her invitation, going through the motions, accepting less than I deserved, afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium of my diminished expectations. I had been mowing lawns as therapy, a mindless activity to keep darker thoughts at bay. Now I was preparing to move across an ocean, start a business, build a life with a woman who challenged and inspired me. The lawn guy and the professor, finding in each other not what we were looking for, but what we needed. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Margaret's house sold quickly, a young couple with a baby on the way falling in love with the garden and the bright kitchen. We found a storage solution for the few possessions we weren't selling or shipping, tied up loose ends with utilities and mail forwarding, said goodbyes to neighbors who had become friends. Through it all, I marveled at how unburdened I felt. The furniture, books, and accumulated objects that had once seemed essential now appeared as what they truly were, just things, not the substance of a life. What mattered was moving forward, toward a future chosen rather than accepted. The night before our departure, we stayed in a hotel near the airport, our former homes empty and waiting for new stories to unfold within their walls. Margaret sat cross-legged on the bed, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed our itinerary. "Remind me again why we booked a flight with a London layover," she asked, glancing up from her papers. "Because it was significantly cheaper, and we're saving for a deposit on an Edinburgh flat," I replied, sitting beside her. She smiled, removing her glasses. "Listen to you, so practical. Who would have thought the impulsive man who followed me to Scotland would become the budget-conscious planner? I contain multitudes," I quipped, earning a laugh that still made my heart lighter. She set aside her papers, turning to face me fully. "Are you nervous about tomorrow? About making this official?" I considered the question seriously. Not nervous. Expectant, maybe. Like standing at the top of a mountain, looking out at a view you've only imagined until now. "Poetic," she observed with a gentle smile. "You've changed since we met. For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better." She took my hand, her expression growing serious. "You know, when Ava asked me why I was doing this, selling my house, moving permanently to another country with a man 15 years my junior, I couldn't give her a logical explanation." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that for the first time in my life, I'm choosing joy over security, possibility over certainty." She squeezed my hand. "I told her you make me brave." The simplicity and honesty of her words touched something deep within me. "You make me brave too," I said softly. We fell asleep that night holding each other, on the cusp of a new chapter neither of us had imagined when a lonely woman had called out to her neighbor, "Stay for dinner, I'm tired of eating alone." Morning arrived with the promise of beginnings. As our plane lifted off from California soil, Margaret's hand found mine, a silent acknowledgement of thresholds crossed and decisions made. Through the window, I watched the landscape of my past life recede, feeling not loss but liberation. "Second chances," Margaret murmured beside me, looking out at the clouds spreading below us like a new world waiting to be explored. "Second chances," I echoed, squeezing her hand. And as the plane turned eastward toward Edinburgh, toward home, I understood that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest invitations. Sometimes pushing a lawn mower across an invisible boundary leads to crossing oceans. Sometimes a moment of shared loneliness opens the door to unimagined joy. Sometimes, life is waiting just next door. Edinburgh welcomed us back with a gentle summer rain, droplets glistening on ancient stone as our taxi wound through streets that now felt familiar. I watched Margaret's face as she gazed out the window, her expression one of homecoming rather than arrival. The key I'd given her hung visibly around her neck, catching the scattered light from rain-washed streets. "We're back," she murmured, her hand finding mine across the seat. "We're home," I corrected gently. "Our temporary accommodations, a furnished flat near the university, would serve until we found a permanent place." As we carried our luggage inside, the reality of our decision settled around us like a comfortable weight. This wasn't a vacation or a temporary adventure. This was our life now, by choice and conviction. That evening, exhausted from travel but too wired to sleep, we walked through the summer rain to a nearby pub. The proprietor, a burly Scotsman named Ian who remembered us from our previous visits, welcomed us with surprising warmth. The American professor and her man, back from across the pond, he boomed, ushering us to a corner table. "First rounds on the house. Welcome home." Home. The word resonated differently now, laden with intention rather than circumstance. As we sipped our drinks, surrounded by the comfortable hum of local conversation, Margaret leaned forward, her eyes bright with a certainty I'd grown to cherish. "I have news," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was going to wait, but I can't." "What is it?" I asked, intrigued by her barely contained excitement. "Remember that innovation hub at the university I mentioned? The director wants to meet with you next week. They're launching an environmental technology incubator, and when I mentioned your work in wildlife conservation tracking, my heart quickened." "Are you serious?" "Completely. It could be perfect timing for that business you've been considering." Startup support, networking opportunities, potential funding. The synchronicity was almost too perfect, another piece falling into place in this new life we were creating. Margaret, that's incredible. I don't know what to say. Say you'll meet with her, Margaret replied, squeezing my hand across the table. Say you'll take the chance. Of course I will, I promised, marveling at how this woman continually pushed me toward possibilities I might otherwise have hesitated to embrace. The following weeks unfolded with purpose and momentum. I met with the Innovation Hub director, a brilliant Norwegian woman named Dr. Linnea Bergstrom, who responded to my conservation technology ideas with enthusiasm and practical suggestions. Margaret threw herself into preparations for the fall term, developing curriculum and connecting with colleagues who had become friends during her visiting term. Most evenings, after our separate workdays, we explored Edinburgh's property market, scheduling viewings and discussing neighborhoods. The search for our shared home became an adventure in itself, discovering hidden corners of the city, imagining our life unfolding in various spaces, learning each other's priorities and preferences. Too dark, Margaret would say of one flat, while I might find another, too removed from the heart of things. We disagreed occasionally but never argued, each difference of opinion bringing us closer to understanding what we both truly wanted. One rainy Thursday in late July, our estate agent showed us a property in the Stockbridge neighborhood, a two-bedroom flat in a Victorian building with high ceilings, large windows, and a small private garden. The moment we stepped inside, something shifted in the air between us. Margaret's hand tightened around mine as we moved from room to room, taking in the wooden floors, the original fireplace, the built-in bookshelves that seemed designed for her collection. The estate agent, sensing our interest, tactfully stepped into the hallway to make a call, leaving us alone in what could become our shared space. What do you think? I asked, watching Margaret run her hand along a windowsill, her expression thoughtful. It feels right, she said simply. Like it's been waiting for us. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The flat wasn't perfect, the kitchen needed updating, one bathroom was cramped, but it had a quality that transcended its physical attributes. It felt like a place where life could unfold with meaning and purpose. Shall we make an offer? I asked. Margaret turned to me, her eyes reflecting both certainty and vulnerability. Are you sure? This is a big commitment. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, echoing words I'd spoken on her California porch months ago. That evening, we celebrated our offer with dinner at our favorite restaurant near the Royal Mile. The owner, Hamish, who had come to know us during our previous stay, brought a bottle of champagne to our table. A little bird told me congratulations. Might be in order, he said with a wink toward Margaret. News travels fast, she laughed. We've only just made the offer. Not just the flat, Hamish clarified. Word around the university is that Professor Ellington has been appointed to lead a new transatlantic literature program. Quite the honor, I understand. Margaret's cheeks flushed. It's not official yet. But it's true? I asked, surprised she hadn't mentioned it. She nodded, suddenly shy. The dean approached me yesterday. It would mean developing exchange programs with American universities, organizing conferences, building something entirely new. Pride surged through me. Margaret, that's amazing. Why didn't you say anything? I wanted to be sure it wasn't just talk, she admitted. And with the flat search and your meetings at the Innovation Hub, it didn't seem the right moment. This calls for a proper toast, Hamish declared, pouring champagne with flourish. To new beginnings, in all their forms. As we clinked glasses, I studied Margaret's face, alight with accomplishment and possibility. The reserved professor, who had once called out to me from her porch, seeking simple dinner companionship, was now embracing a future neither of us could have imagined then. And I was no longer the man who mowed lawns to quiet his mind, who accepted the diminished expectations of others as his due. We had remade ourselves, not by discarding our pasts but by finding in each other the courage to grow beyond them. Our offer on the flat was accepted 2 days later, setting in motion a whirlwind of paperwork, financial arrangements, and planning. August blurred into September, the Scottish summer yielding to hints of autumn as we navigated the complexities of foreign property purchase, business establishment, and academic preparation. Through it all, we held to our certainty like a compass. When bureaucratic hurdles arose, and they did, from visa complications to banking issues, we faced them together, finding solutions where alone we might have seen only obstacles. By mid-September, as Margaret's classes began and my meetings with potential conservation clients increased, we received word that our flat purchase had cleared all legal hurdles. The keys, real ones, not the symbolic one I'd given Margaret, would be ours in 1 week. We should celebrate properly, Margaret said as we walked through the Princes Street Gardens after receiving the news. A housewarming, once we're settled. Absolutely, I agreed. Though our social circle here is still relatively small. Quality over quantity, she replied with a smile. My colleagues, your new contacts from the Innovation Hub. Hamish and Ian, who've become friends in their way. It's a start. A start. The phrase echoed in my mind as we continued our walk, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. Everything about our life in Edinburgh was a start: new home, new work, new community. Yet it didn't feel tentative or uncertain. It felt like foundations being laid with intention and care. The day we moved into our flat, a crisp October morning with sunlight streaming through the large windows, Margaret stood in the empty living room, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, and took a deep breath. It smells like possibility, she declared, turning to me with a smile that still made my heart skip. Like blank pages waiting to be filled. I set down the box I was carrying and moved to stand beside her, taking in the space that was now ours. What shall we write on those pages, Professor? She leaned into me, her warmth a counterpoint to the slight chill of the unheated room. Something true. Something brave. The weeks that followed were a lesson in practical magic, the alchemy of turning a house into a home. We unpacked the possessions we'd shipped from California, a curated collection of what truly mattered from our previous lives. Margaret's colorful textiles softened the Victorian architecture, my technology coexisted with her books, new purchases, made, together with careful consideration, filled the gaps. By November, with our housewarming party approaching, the flat had transformed from an empty shell to a space that reflected our shared aesthetic and separate passions. The living room shelves held Margaret's literature alongside my photography. Books. The second bedroom functioned as both her study and my home office. The small garden had been cleared and planted with hardy Scottish perennials that would bloom in spring. It's really ours now, isn't it? Margaret mused one evening as we sat by the fireplace, the first real cold of autumn making its presence known outside our windows. It really is, I confirmed, watching the firelight play across her features. She shifted to face me more directly, something hesitant in her expression. I've been thinking about something. A question, really, that I'm not sure how to ask. My heart quickened, mind racing to what this might be. You can ask me anything, Margaret. You know that. She took a breath, fingers unconsciously touching the key that still hung around her neck. Where do you see us in 5 years? In 10? I know it's a cliché, but... I understood the root of her question. At 53, Margaret was thinking about the future in ways that differed from my perspective at 38. Not just in terms of career trajectory or lifestyle, but in the deeper realities of aging, health, the arc of a shared life. I see us here, I said carefully, or somewhere like here. Building our work, traveling when we can. Supporting each other through whatever comes. I paused, wanting to be absolutely honest. I know there are challenges ahead that we can't fully anticipate. Age-related issues that might affect you before they affect me. But that doesn't scare me, Margaret. It's part of the package I've chosen, the whole of you, the whole of us, not just the easy parts. Relief softened her features. I worry sometimes. She admitted. That you'll wake up one day next to a woman 15 years your senior and wonder what you've done. That won't happen, I said with certainty. What we have isn't based on some superficial attraction that will fade. It's built on something deeper, who we are together, how we make each other better, braver versions of ourselves. She nodded. Slowly, the concern in her eyes giving way to something warmer. Thank you for that. For seeing me beyond the number. Always, I promised, pulling her close. The night of our housewarming party arrived with perfect autumn crispness, cold enough to appreciate the warmth of our home but clear enough for guests to travel easily. Margaret had spent the day preparing, arranging platters of Scottish and American offerings, selecting music, placing candles strategically throughout the flat. I watched her move through our space with confident grace, this brilliant woman who had taken a chance on the lawn guy next door, and marveled at the journey that had brought us here. Our guests began arriving at 7, Margaret's colleagues. From the university English department, my new contacts from the environmental technology sector, neighbors we'd begun to know, and the few local friends we'd made. Hamish brought wine from his restaurant, Ian from the pub contributed a bottle of rare scotch, Dr. Bergstrom from the Innovation Hub arrived with her wife and a potted plant for our garden. As conversation and laughter filled the rooms of our home, I found myself standing slightly apart, observing the scene with a sense of wonder. Here we were, thousands of miles from where we'd started, hosting a gathering of people who represented our new life, a life chosen, not inherited or accepted by default. Margaret caught my eye across the room, raising her glass slightly in silent acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, our private toast amidst the social whirl. Later, as the party wound down and the last guests departed with warm words and promises of future gatherings, Margaret and I stood in our doorway, waving goodbye. When the door closed, she leaned against it with a contented sigh. That was lovely, she said, slipping off her shoes. I think we've officially arrived, don't you? I think we have, I agreed, beginning to collect glasses from side tables. Though I'm not sure I've ever felt more like an adult than hosting a housewarming party in Edinburgh. She laughed, moving to help me. Better late than never. Some people never grow into themselves at all. The phrase struck me, its simple wisdom illuminating something I'd felt but hadn't articulated. Growing into ourselves, that's exactly what we're doing, isn't it? Not just getting older, but becoming more authentically who we're meant to be. Margaret paused, a wineglass in hand, her expression thoughtful. I think that's the work of a lifetime, David. And I'm grateful to be doing it with you. In the months that followed, our Edinburgh life deepened its roots. My conservation technology business, formerly established as EcoTrack Solutions, secured its first major client, a Scottish wildlife trust tracking red squirrel populations in the Highlands. Margaret's transatlantic literature program launched. With impressive enrollment, her vision for bridging literary traditions gaining recognition beyond the university. We fell into rhythms that suited us, shared breakfasts before parting for our workdays, evening walks through Edinburgh's atmospheric streets, weekend explorations of Scotland's wild landscapes, quiet nights by our fireplace, reading or talking, or simply being together in comfortable silence. Christmas approached with festive lights transforming the city, markets appearing in public squares, the scent of mulled wine and pine trees mingling in the cold air. Margaret's daughter Ava announced she would visit for the holiday, her first time seeing our Scottish life. Are you nervous about her coming? I asked Margaret one evening as we decorated our small tree, a tradition neither of us had bothered within our separate lives post-divorce. A little, she admitted, carefully hanging a delicate glass ornament we'd purchased at the Christmas market. I want her to understand this choice, to see that it's brought me a happiness I hadn't thought possible. She will, I assured her, though I harbored my own small anxieties about the visit. Ava had been cautiously supportive from a distance, but face-to-face approval might be different. When Ava arrived, jet-lagged but smiling on a snowy December evening, the reunion between mother and daughter brought tears to my eyes. They embraced in our entryway, Margaret's face alight with a joy that transcended all else. Let me look at you, Margaret said, stepping back to study her daughter. You're glowing. Thailand agrees with you. And Scotland clearly agrees with you, Ava replied, her gaze taking in not just her mother but the home we'd created. Her eyes met mine over Margaret's shoulder. Hello, lawn guy. Welcome to Edinburgh, Ava, I said, extending my hand, which she ignored in favor of a quick, firm hug. Thank you for making her happy, she whispered, too low for Margaret to hear. The days of Ava's visit unfolded with a natural ease I hadn't dared hope for. She embraced our Edinburgh life with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about my business, engaging deeply with Margaret's academic work, exploring the city with enthusiasm despite the winter chill. On Christmas Eve, as Margaret prepared dinner in our kitchen, Ava and I found ourselves alone in the living room, nursing glasses of whiskey by the fire. I had my doubts, you know, she said without preamble, her directness reminiscent of her mother's. When Mom told me she was staying in Scotland, with you. I worried it was impulsive, that she might be running away from something rather than toward something real. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. That's a reasonable concern. It happened quickly. But seeing you together here. She gestured. Around our home. It makes sense now. You fit, somehow. Not despite the age difference or your different backgrounds, but maybe because of them. We balance each other, I suggested. More than that, Ava countered, leaning forward. You see each other. Do you know how rare that is? My father looked at my mother for 22 years and never really saw her. The observation struck me with its simple truth. Margaret and I had recognized something in each other from that first dinner, not just attraction or companionship, but a quality of genuine seeing that had been missing in our previous relationships. I'm trying to be worthy of that, I said. Quietly. Ava studied me for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. I think you are. Christmas Day brought unexpected snow, transforming Edinburgh into a scene from a Victorian postcard. We exchanged gifts by the fire, books and music, a hand-knitted scarf from Ava for each of us, a silver bracelet for Margaret that I'd had engraved with a line from Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? As Margaret fastened it around her wrist, her eyes meeting mine with perfect understanding, I felt a completion that transcended the holiday, the setting, even the relationship itself. It was the satisfaction of a journey undertaken with courage, of a life being lived deliberately rather than by default. That evening, after a festive dinner and perhaps too much wine, the three of us bundled up and walked through the snowy streets to Edinburgh Castle, illuminated against the night sky. Standing on the esplanade, snowflakes settling on our shoulders. We gazed out at the city spread below, our city now, by choice and commitment. I get it, Ava said suddenly, her breath fogging in the cold air. Why you stayed. Why you built this life together. It's beautiful. Margaret slipped her arm through her daughter's, her other hand finding mine. The beauty isn't just in the place, she said softly. It's in the choosing. The words echoed in my mind long after we'd returned home, after Ava had departed for Thailand with promises to visit again, after January had yielded to February and the first hints of spring began to appear in Edinburgh's parks and gardens. The choosing. Not just the initial decision to follow Margaret to Scotland, but the daily choices that shaped our life together, to communicate honestly, to support each other's work, to face challenges as partners, to celebrate small victories, and weather disappointments as a team. 1 year after our permanent move to Edinburgh, we hosted a small dinner party to mark the anniversary. Hamish and his wife, Dr. Bergstrom and her partner, 2 colleagues from the university, and the couple who had become our closest friends in the building, a retired Scottish doctor and his American husband who had their own story of midlife reinvention. As conversations flowed around our dining table, topics ranging from politics to literature to the best hiking trails in the Highlands, I caught Margaret's eye across the room. In that moment of silent connection, I saw reflected back all that we had built together, not just a home or a social circle, but a life of meaning and purpose, of mutual growth and shared joy. Later, as we readied for bed in the quiet aftermath of the gathering, Margaret sat at her dressing table, removing her earrings. I watched her in the mirror, struck anew by her beauty, not the conventional beauty of youth, but the more profound beauty of a woman fully inhabiting her life, unapologetically herself. What, she asked, catching my gaze in the reflection. Just thinking about how far we've come, I said. From that first dinner on your porch to here. She turned to face me directly. Do you ever regret it? Taking such a leap? Never, I answered without hesitation. It was the best decision I've ever made. A smile touched her lips. Mine too. As we settled into bed, the familiar weight and warmth of her beside me, I thought about the man I had been before Margaret's invitation, living half a life, accepting limitations imposed by others, afraid to disrupt the fragile equilibrium of lowered expectations. That man could never have imagined this, a home in Edinburgh, a thriving business focused on conservation, a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine seeing. He couldn't have conceived of the richness that awaited beyond the safe boundaries of his diminished world. Penny for your thoughts, Margaret murmured, already half asleep beside me. I was thinking about that day, I said quietly. When you called out to me from your porch. Stay for dinner, I'm tired of eating alone. She acknowledged. My moment of loneliness and courage. The invitation that changed everything. She shifted closer, her head finding its place on my shoulder. For both of us. As Margaret drifted into sleep, I remained awake a while longer, considering the seemingly small moments that alter the trajectory of a life, a dinner invitation accepted, a confession of loneliness, a decision to follow possibility across an ocean. None of these choices had seemed momentous at the time. Yet together, they had led us here, to this shared life that neither of us had imagined before we found each other. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. How many such moments might we miss, walking through our days with eyes fixed on the expected rather than open to the possible? How many invitations do we decline, how many boundaries remain uncrossed, how many connections unrealized because we fear disruption or change? Margaret stirred slightly beside me, her breathing deep and even. In the dim light filtering through our curtains, I could make out the curve of her cheek, the silver strands in her hair catching what little illumination there was. This remarkable woman had taken a chance on the lawn guy next door, had opened her door in her life when it would have been easier to remain in comfortable isolation. And I, in turn, had found the courage to step beyond the safe confines of my diminished expectations, to follow not just a woman but a vision of what life could be when lived deliberately, with intention and courage. As sleep finally claimed me, one thought remained clear and certain: sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest invitations. Sometimes pushing a lawn mower across an invisible boundary leads to crossing oceans. Sometimes a moment of shared loneliness opens the door to unimagined joy. Sometimes, life is just waiting for us to say yes to its unexpected offerings. And sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin in youth with grand passion, but in the rich middle of life, when two people who have learned from loss and disappointment recognize in each other not just a second chance at love, but a first chance at becoming fully themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.